Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi barakatuh. My name is Simon Hill. Thanks for tuning into my channel. Thanks for checking out my content. Please hit the like button and subscribe. So, where are we right now, babe? Tell me.
Sultan Ahmed.
We're in Sultan Ahmed, and behind me is the Hagia Sophia, right? All right, and then behind me this way is the Blue Mosque, correct? All right. So, today we're in the middle of the month of Ramadan. I'm here in Istanbul, Turkey. We're here in beautiful Sultan Ahmed in front of these historic mosques that are very important to Muslims around the world and to Islamic culture and history. And I want to use this time to reflect on my conversion to Islam, how I became a Muslim, my relationship to Islam throughout the years, how I view God, and etc. So I'm just going to get to it. So being a Black American, growing up in America, you learn very quickly that our history was stolen and taken from us during that horrible period that was the transatlantic slave trade, which lasted for hundreds of years. During that time, millions of Black Africans were kidnapped from their homes and unable to speak their original language and worship God the way that they were, the way they did originally. Pardon. And as I was growing up, I was born in 1990, and I remember being in the 4th grade, and I remember reading this book about Malcolm X, which was a comic book. And in this comic book, they talk about Malcolm's journey to becoming who he was. And I remember seeing in one of the pages of this comic book, images of us being kidnapped from Africa. And many of us were crying out for Allah to save us and protect us while we were on that treacherous journey. And throughout Black American history, there have been movements to try to bring back Islam into the African American community. And I was always convinced by those arguments when I was younger that this was the right thing to do, because Christianity as a whole was beaten into us and was brought into our lives as a product of our enslavement and dehumanization. Malcolm has always been an important figure for me, and he's always been someone that I admire. And I was very convinced by that argument when I was a very, very young child exposed to that material. I also grew up in a, pretty pro-Black house, and I also was educated on the history of our people and what we went through. And I always thought that one of the solutions for us as Black Americans was to reclaim our identity by going back to one of the original religions that our people worshipped before we were kidnapped. And only 30% of the people who were captured were probably Muslim, but it's a higher percentage of my ancestor saying La ilaha illallah than, Hail Mary or Hallelujah. So even though I grew up in a house with a Catholic mother and a Presbyterian father, and I went to both churches growing up, I never once remember praying to Jesus Christ. I never once, said a prayer in the name of Jesus or anything like that. This just never made sense to me. And I was, I even went to a Catholic university, and I went to a Catholic elementary school when I was younger. But it never clicked with me that Jesus was God or that Christianity was the right way. But even though I was knowledgeable about Islamic influence on African American identity, I was still not convinced that there was a God above, right? It still didn't make sense to me how there would be one deity or being monitoring and controlling us, telling us not to masturbate, not to have premarital relations, not to live with the person you love before you're married, things like that. It never made sense to me. So as I got older, I had conflicts with my parents about going to church, and eventually I just became somewhat of an atheist, though to be honest, I was influenced by the 5%ers, and I was a 5%er for my late teenage years into my early 20s, and then I let that go. I'm not going to delve much into what the 5%ers are, but I'll just say if you want to know more about it, please do your research. I am absolutely not a 5%er now, and I disavow many of the ideas and beliefs that they had. And if you were one of those people in the comments who wants to say that I was a part of an extremist organization or an extremist fraternity, fuck you. I'm sorry, I'm saying F you in front of the mosque, but that's just the truth. You're just one of those haters in my comments. So being a 5%er for a long time, I was exposed to a lot of Islamic material. And after university, I graduated in New Orleans. And after I graduated, I moved to Miami. And when I was in Miami, I was living alone for the first time as a grown man, paying my own bills, taking care of myself, doing what I needed to do to survive, just working odd jobs, chasing my dreams, that sort of thing. And, going through such hard times there, I realized that there was somebody looking out for me, taking care of me, making sure that I was going to be okay. And there was no other word for that feeling or that protector other than God. So I knew when I was around 23 and I was damn near homeless, but I found a way to get my first apartment, get a car, be able to pay bills and do things with my life I never thought I would as a young man by myself coming from Monroe, Louisiana and living in Miami. I knew that somebody was taking care of me, and that had to be God. So I had to find out the right way that I could worship God. And, in university, and also because I was a 5%er, I was exposed to a lot of Islamic doctrine and teaching. And I, generally knew the story about how the Prophet, peace be upon him, got the revelation as a 40-year-old man, told the world that there's no God but God and nobody should worship anything other than God, not even him, unified Arabia, and brought an ideology and a religion to the world that was meant to bring peace, harmony, and justice. And I always thought that this is the religion, if God is real, that makes the most sense. Because in Islam, you're not supposed to worship anything other than God, and all the people that came before, from Adam to Jesus to Muhammad, are all prophets, and they all said the same thing about God. And that was very influential for me. It made the most sense, and it was a beautiful idea. And in Miami, that's when I finally began to take steps towards accepting that idea. I did flirt with a little bit of the idea of joining the Nation of Islam. If you don't know what the Nation of Islam is, please check that out. But I eventually settled on going to this mosque in Miami called Al-Ansar, right? I picked up a copy of the Quran there, read it for myself, beginning to end, in English, front to back, 2 times. And the main ideas I got from the Quran were that God is one, God is the most beneficent and merciful being that there ever is. He'll forgive all your sins, and he'll forgive everything except disbelief or shirk, right? And that was convincing for me. That made the most sense to me, because it's something that I can't imagine, and they never put a face or a name on God. And it's unlike Christianity, where they almost explicitly say that the white man is God. And it was very powerful when I read the Quran 2 times. I eventually go back to Al-Ansar when I'm around 24, and I convert. I convert in this mosque that's also a madrasa, meaning that there are kids there who are getting an education and learning about different topics and things like that. And I took my shahada there with this old man named Muhammad, and I hope he's doing well. He was a very old man, and he made me a Muslim. So I hope he gets blessings and rewards in this life and the hereafter for that. And I spoke about a lot of what happens next in my Tunisia video. I'll make this short. Basically, after living in Miami about 2 years or so as a Muslim, I eventually decided to get married because I was very, very dedicated to the religion. And I read one time in Sahih Bukhari that getting married is half of your deen, and you're not fully Muslim until you're married, right? So I decided, hey, I need to get married. And that's what I decided to do. I met this girl in Tunisia, an Arab woman. We got married. We were married for a few years, et cetera, right? And I spoke a lot about what I experienced in Tunisia. And that was my first time living in a, real Muslim country, real Muslim society, and being in that environment, right? And it was something I was looking forward to, because as a very devout and practicing Muslim at the time, it's what I wanted. I wanted to be surrounded by people who had the same deen. I wanted to be able to pray 5 times at the mosque if I wanted to. I wanted to be in a community or a society that had Ramadan and kept it as a sacred time of the month. And it was great. I also got the opportunity to visit many other parts of the Muslim world. And this is where the biography stops, and this is where I start talking about my experiences. I've been fortunate and blessed to be able to see many, many parts of the ummah, from an Arab country in North Africa like Tunisia, to Southeast Asia and Indonesia and Malaysia, to the European part of the ummah in Bosnia, and now currently I'm in Turkey. And I've seen probably, a lot of the Muslim world that many Muslims probably don't get the opportunity or the chance to. And what I really love about Islam is that our ummah is so diverse, right? Our community is so diverse. We're probably the most diverse community in the world, the second biggest religion, 1.5 billion followers, from Morocco to Tajikistan, and, from Albania all the way to South Africa. You can find people who say that there's no God but God and Muhammad is his messenger, right? One of the reasons I became Muslim was because of the explicit anti-racism, anti-blackness that was expressed by the Prophet when he stood and made his last khutbah to the Muslims and said that an Arab is no better than a non-Arab, a white is no better than a black, and a black is no better than a white except in piety and except in fear of Allah. And when I first read that and first heard that he said that, it brought tears to my eyes. It made me cry because I had never heard a man, from 1400 years ago, when it was fashionable and it was understandable to say that my tribe is better than your tribe, or my race is better than your race, or my nation is better than your nation, to say something so revolutionary that's still revolutionary today. There are people who still believe that their identity supersedes others, right? And that's pretty much all I needed to hear. I also rationalized that there was a God, and I'm not saying that I converted to Islam for any other reason than believing that there's God and that Muhammad was his prophet, because what he said showed that he was a prophet, right? Now, because I've been able to see so many different parts of the ummah, I've seen a lot of good things and I've seen a lot of bad things. And also since my younger years, when I was a young, ignorant child, 9 years old reading a book about Malcolm X, and 20 years old just reading a text about Muhammad and stuff like that, I've been able to learn more about the history of the ummah and also more about the history of black people specifically in our ummah. And I've also had anecdotal experiences as a black person traveling throughout the Muslim world. And I want to say that first and foremost, I think that in every society, in every culture, there are prevailing ideas that motivate the people in how they act. For example, and somebody's going to argue with me in the comments that this is not true, but I will say that generally, for example, in the US, sexism, explicit sexism is not, socially acceptable, right? Saying things like, women belong in X place, men belong in this place, that sort of thing is wiped out of our society because the prevailing idea and notions and norms have made that unacceptable, right? Also, for example, in identity, for example, in Mexico, for example, in their constitution, they say they are a mestizo race. They're a mix of the Amerindian and the European migrant or conqueror, conquistador, whatever you want to say. I'm not trying to divert here. I'm making a point. Prevailing ideas create the identity and philosophies of the people and how they act. And unfortunately, in the Muslim ummah, the anti-racism and anti-blackness, that's a confusing term to say, has been lost in the prevailing ideas and norms of the average Muslim. For example, if you take any Muslim from, I would say, Uzbekistan to Morocco to Nigeria, and you ask them to draw a picture of the Prophet, astaghfirullah, they would not do it. They would know automatically not to do it. Even if they are a nominal, barely praying, not even fasting Muslim, that's something that they generally would not do. But you will be surprised how commonly and how often anti-blackness and racism has exposed itself in the Muslim world, I've spoken about my experiences in Tunisia. I could talk about my experiences in Bosnia, but I just want to give you an example of a situation that happened in Indonesia. I used to go pray at this little mosque in this small neighborhood in Jakarta every morning for Fajr, sometimes for Maghrib, sometimes for Isha, different times of the day. I would go out there and be at that mosque all the time. And I was obviously a foreigner because I was the only black guy in this room full of Asian people. I would go there all the time to this little mosque in Indonesia, right? Now, Some people are going to crucify me for this, but I also created a Tinder account in Indonesia where I set up an account as a white man just to see what the reaction was and compare it to my account as me, of course. And as we all know, in Islam, the prevailing idea or the ideology says that non-Muslim women cannot marry non-Muslim men, right? I was a very practicing Muslim at the time. And also, in my white account on Tinder, I said that I was not a Muslim, like in my bio. Comparing my account to the white account that I made, it was full of hijabi Indonesian Muslim women in the white account, and in mine barely even 40 matches, you know, and it was insane. And I just want this to highlight how big white supremacy is within the ummah, right? And taking from that, when I was working in Indonesia, I was with a group of British people and stuff like that. And there was this guy from Scotland, right? And he was dating one of these Indonesian girls who obviously didn't care that he wasn't a Muslim. He came to me because I was like the only practicing Muslim in this group of Western foreigners at this company. And he says, I want to, Simon, I see you're, fasting and praying and all this stuff. I want to, do this because, my girl really wants me to be Muslim, right? And so I say, come with me to the mosque. Come with me to the masjid. And him and I go down to the mosque. And just because he was white, the Indonesian people swarmed him, literally swarmed all over him. And when he left the mosque, it's like the streets were packed full of people, and he had only been there one time. I had been there multiple times, right? As a foreigner, as an obvious person who was not Indonesian there. And the way they treated this white man, it was totally different than the way they treated me. And I'm not saying that I should have been treated like that or I wanted to be mobbed. What I'm saying is that's an example of the type of white supremacy that exists within the Muslim ummah, right? They view whiteness or white converts as the pinnacle or the peak of what they want for their civilization, right? I could also talk about how I was in Bosnia and I was followed around the store, or how when I went to the mosque in Serbia, people were asking me, "Are you Muslim?" Right? As if this is a weird thing. And I also want to say that throughout the history of the Islamic world, they have historically enslaved and degraded black people for hundreds of years, right? The longest slave trade in history that existed was not the transatlantic one with the Europeans, but the ones with the Arabs and the Turks, when they were kidnapping Africans for hundreds of years, castrating us and sending us to their different countries and regions. And the only reason that we're not a sizable minority in their country today is because they forbade us to reproduce, right? So I want to ask you, if you're in the comments or if you're about to prepare some long scathing response, I want to ask you this. I want to just ask you this one question. Don't type anything. If the Muslim world was built on them capturing, torturing, genociding, enslaving your people, whatever religion, whatever ethnic group you are, if the Islamic world was built on, kidnapping Turks or kidnapping Chinese people or kidnapping Moroccans or Egyptians or whatever, if it was built on that, would you still have the same vitriol and anger that you're about to have for what I'm about to say? As I look back on what my relationship with Islam is, I look at it like this. Unfortunately, in this world that we live in, as of right now, I will always be a black man first before I will be a Muslim. As I walk these streets in Turkey, the first assumption of me is not that I'm a Muslim, not that I'm a believer, not that I'm a mu'min, not that I'm someone who's a fearer, someone who fears Allah in the Day of Judgment. The assumption is that I'm black first and then everything else second. This is not the world that we created. This is the world that has been created because of the history of peoples, the movements of peoples. I'll say unabashedly right now, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I still believe in Islam. I still hold true to the idea that there's a oneness in mankind, that all people should be treated with dignity, and that Islam is, if the ideology was implemented correctly, could be the cure for the ills that face all societies in the world. But what I can't get with is how people are so quick to cling to the small things, but forget the big things. Throughout the Muslim world, they disrespect women. Throughout the Muslim world, minorities are treated like trash. Throughout the Muslim world, there's a lack of justice, even for their own people. You can talk to any Arab in any country, and they'll say that the rulers lack justice, that there's no justice in their society, and that's not Islam. Now, if you're a theologian, if you're someone who knows the book, knows the deen in and out, and you want to correct me theologically, I want to say first and foremost, you're right. The great thing about religion is that any argument I make against it can always be disproven with the book itself, or with the ideas in the book itself. I could say, why does evil exist in the world if God is all good? Why do these things happen to bad people? And you will say that God tests people, God creates evil to find out who's good and bad. And I would say you're right. According to your theology, you are absolutely right. A theologian, a sheikh, an alim, someone who knows the deen can refute everything I'm saying and come out on top. I am not saying that anything I'm saying cannot be disputed. But what I am saying is, unfortunately, we live in reality. And as a black man first, I have to realize that my deen or my belief in Allah is not implemented or viewed the same way, right, in the world, according as it relates to mad other Muslims, right? I shouldn't have to only exist in an all-black Muslim society to be treated as a full Muslim, right? And the hypocrisy that's exhibited by male and female Muslims alike throughout the ummah needs to stop. I hope that this message is understood. I hope that nobody gets any vitriol or evil from my words. I'm only trying to say good things. I'm not trying to discredit Islam. Islam is perfect. The Muslims are not. And that's what I'll leave it as. So thank you for tuning into my video. Thank you for watching, and leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe. But if all you're going to do is attack me, we know what's going to happen. So, babe, are you annoyed with me? No? Okay. She loves me, and that's all that matters. She loves me, and that's all that matters. All right. So, Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace.